Malcolm Thompson, brilliant black tech CEO of NextGen Solutions, frozen in disbelief as flight attendant Heather demands his first-class boarding pass again. Entire plane silent watching confrontation. Malcolm's mind racing to board meeting that could change everything. The decision he makes in next 30 seconds will alter his life forever. Before I dive into what happened next in this shocking confrontation, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. This story about racial profiling at 30000 feet will make you question everything you thought you knew about privilege. Hit that subscribe button and like this video if you've ever witnessed discrimination happening right before your eyes. Malcolm Thompson wasn't just any passenger on Flight 2187 from Chicago to Atlanta that Wednesday morning. At 42, he had transformed from a kid coding in his grandmother's basement in Detroit's East Side to the founder and CEO of NextGen Solutions, one of the fastest-growing tech security companies in America. His revolutionary AI security software had just caught the Pentagon's attention, promising to transform how the government protected its most sensitive digital assets while eliminating the inherent biases that plagued most security. Algorithms. Tomorrow's meeting in Washington, D.C. wasn't just another business pitch. It represented everything Malcolm had worked for since teaching himself to code on a second-hand computer when he was 12. The Pentagon contract would validate what he already knew, but the tech world refused to fully acknowledge that a black man from the projects could out-innovate the Silicon Valley elite. But today, like every day, Malcolm was fighting the battle that never ended, no matter how successful he became. The constant microaggressions were exhausting in their predictability. "Sir, can I see your ticket again?" the TSA agent had asked earlier, despite having just verified his ID and scanning his boarding pass. "Is this your luggage, sir?" Another agent pulled his expensive Toomey carry-on aside for random screening while letting 3 white executives pass through with similar bags. Malcolm had perfected the calm, measured response. The slight nod, the patient smile that never reached his eyes. He knew the game act too frustrated, and he'd become the angry black man. Stay too quiet, and he'd be seen as suspicious or hiding something. As he strode through O'Hare International that morning, in his perfectly tailored Navy Tom Ford suit carrying his leather portfolio, embossed with the NextGen logo, he felt the familiar weight of being simultaneously hypervisible and invisible. People noticed him. A 6'2" black man in first-class business attire was always noticed, but they didn't see him for who he was. "You heading to the gate for the service staff meeting?" a gate agent had asked despite his executive appearance. Malcolm had simply smiled and shown his first-class boarding pass. What Malcolm didn't know as he navigated the familiar obstacle course of assumptions was that he was being watched. Diane Bennett, a 58-year-old white woman with steel gray hair cut in a severe bob, observed him from behind her Wall Street Journal. As Senior Vice President of Operations at Rival Tech, she recognized Malcolm immediately. More importantly, she knew exactly what he was heading to Washington, for her company had been desperately trying to secure the same Pentagon contract for months. Rival Tech's CEO, Gerald Williams, had made it clear in yesterday's emergency meeting, "We cannot let NextGen beat us to this. Their technology is actually better than ours, especially on bias elimination. Find a way to delay Thompson. We need more time to fix our algorithm." Diane had nodded, wheels already turning. Now watching Malcolm proceed toward their shared gate, she adjusted her cream-colored Burberry scarf and began formulating a plan. The Pentagon meeting was tomorrow at 9 a.m. If Malcolm missed his connection in Atlanta, he'd miss his chance. As Malcolm approached gate C-18, he discreetly checked his Patek Philippe watch, a reminder of his first major success, the encryption software he'd sold to Amazon 5 years ago. Boarding would begin in 20 minutes, plenty of time to review his presentation once more. He opened his laptop at the gate, revising key points about how his security software eliminated the racial biases that had proven so problematic in other systems. NextGen's AI didn't flag black and brown faces at higher rates than whites. It didn't mistake darker-skinned women for men. It didn't perpetuate the digital redlining that had become the hidden scandal of the tech security industry. Now boarding our first-class passengers for Flight 2187 to Atlanta, the gate agent announced. Malcolm gathered his belongings and moved toward the jet bridge, feeling the familiar mix of pride and defensiveness as he presented his first-class boarding pass. The gate agent looked from the pass to Malcolm and back again, that momentary hesitation. He'd grown accustomed to the silent question of whether he belonged. "Have a good flight, Mr. Thompson," she finally said, returning his boarding pass. What Malcolm didn't see was Diane Bennett watching his every move, waiting for her opportunity. Her own first-class ticket for a completely different flight, clutched tightly in her manicured hand. The cabin of the Boeing 737 gleamed under the soft lighting as Malcolm made his way down the jet bridge. He nodded politely to the flight attendants standing at the entrance, noticing the slight widening of eyes as they registered his presence in the first-class lane. He'd flown over 1,000,000 miles this year alone, yet the subtle reactions never disappeared. "Welcome aboard," said the flight attendant, a blonde woman whose name tag read Heather. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly as she glanced at his boarding pass. "4A is on your right window seat." Malcolm moved down the aisle to his assigned seat 4, a window first row of first class. He stored his laptop bag under the seat in front of him, but realized his carry-on would need to go in the overhead bin. Standing up, he lifted his bag into the compartment above row 3, as the space above his own seat was already occupied. "Excuse me," he said to another passenger reaching across to secure his bag. It took perhaps 20 seconds, no more. When he turned back to his seat, 4A, the seat printed on his boarding pass, the seat he had paid $1,200 for, he found it occupied. Diane Bennett sat there gazing out the window, acting as though she hadn't just committed the cardinal sin of air travel, taking someone else's assigned seat. "Excuse me," Malcolm said, keeping his voice measured and calm. "I believe you're in my seat." Diane turned, her expression a carefully crafted mix of confusion and indignation. She looked Malcolm up and down, taking in his expensive suit, his watch, his confident posture, all the markers of success that should have insulated him from this very situation. "I think you're mistaken," she said, her tone suggesting that he, not she, had made an error. "This is 4C." Malcolm felt the familiar tension creep into his shoulders, the automatic recalibration that occurred whenever these situations arose. "Stay calm. Don't raise your voice. Don't show frustration." "No, this is 4A, he replied, pointing to the seat number clearly marked on the overhead panel. "I have the window seat." He pulled out his boarding pass as evidence. Diane barely glanced at it. "Well, my ticket says 4C, and I'm quite certain this is it." Her voice carried just enough for nearby passengers to hear, creating an audience. A movement to his right signaled Heather's approach. The flight attendant had noticed the conversation and was now inserting herself into the situation. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, looking directly at Malcolm, rather than the woman occupying his seat. "Yes," Malcolm said, maintaining his professional tone. "I'm in seat 4A, but this lady has taken it." "May I see your boarding pass, sir?" Heather asked, her emphasis on "sir" carrying a note of skepticism. Malcolm handed over his boarding pass, which Heather scrutinized with unusual thoroughness, turning it over, checking the date, flight number, and seat assignment multiple times. "And you, ma'am?" she asked Diane, her tone notably warmer. Diane produced her boarding pass with a confident smile. "I'm in 4C, but I was certain this was it." Heather glanced at Diane's pass, then back at Malcolm's, then at the seat numbers. A flicker of recognition crossed her face as she realized Diane was indeed in the wrong seat, but instead of addressing the situation directly, she hesitated. "Sir, it seems there's been a mix-up. Perhaps you wouldn't mind taking the ladies' seat instead. It's also in first class, just the aisle rather than the window." Malcolm felt his jaw tighten. The request was absurd, asking him to give up his rightfully purchased seat to accommodate someone who had simply decided to take it. "I specifically selected and paid for a window seat," he explained calmly. "My boarding pass clearly shows 4A, and I'd like to sit in my assigned seat." More passengers were boarding now, the narrow aisle becoming congested as the standoff continued. Malcolm could feel eyes on him, judging, assuming. The familiar dilemma presented itself: assert his rights and risk being labeled difficult, or concede to avoid a scene. "Sir, it would really help us keep on schedule if you could just take the other seat," Heather pressed, lowering her voice as though offering a reasonable compromise to an unreasonable request. "I understand the time pressure," Malcolm replied, "but I don't see why I should give up my seat when I'm the one holding the correct boarding pass for it." A male flight attendant named James approached now his presence, adding another layer of pressure to the situation. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked, immediately making eye contact with Heather, rather than assessing the situation himself. "This gentleman insists on having his assigned seat, but the lady is already settled," Heather explained, framing Malcolm as the problem. James turned to Malcolm, his expression stern. "Sir, we need to keep boarding moving. Could you please take the other first-class seat so we can resolve this?" Malcolm felt a familiar heat rising in his chest, not anger, but the deep frustration of facing an impossible choice. Make a scene and become the stereotype of an angry black man, or accept the injustice and reinforce the idea that his rights were somehow less important. "I'm not trying to cause problems," Malcolm said, aware that his voice was being carefully monitored by everyone within earshot. "But I don't understand why I'm being asked to give up my assigned seat when someone else has taken it incorrectly." Diane shifted in the seat, his seat, and addressed the flight attendants directly, ignoring Malcolm entirely. "I'm sorry for the confusion, but I'm already settled now and my medication makes changing seats difficult." A lie, but delivered with such practiced concern that several nearby passengers nodded sympathetically. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay in boarding. Please be patient as our cabin crew resolves a seating issue." The entire plane now knew about the situation. Malcolm noticed a young woman in row 6, Rachel, discreetly holding up her phone recording the incident. He also spotted a young black boy, maybe 10 years old, watching wide-eyed from the economy section, his expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. In that moment, Malcolm realized the boy was seeing something formative, either a black man standing up for himself, or a black man being forced once again to accommodate others at his own expense. The weight of this additional responsibility settled on his shoulders. The airline supervisor was now being called. His critical meeting in Washington was less than 24 hours away. Malcolm Thompson, CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, stood in the aisle of Flight 2187, being treated like an inconvenience for simply expecting to sit in the seat he had purchased. The plane had gone completely silent, every passenger watching, waiting to see what would happen next. The silence that had fallen over the cabin was broken only by the soft hum of the ventilation system and the occasional beep of the boarding scanner at the front of the plane. Malcolm stood perfectly still in the aisle, aware that every shift in his posture, every change in his expression, was being scrutinized by dozens of pairs of eyes. "I'm not moving to another seat," he stated, his voice level and controlled. "I purchased 4A. My boarding pass says 4A. And according to the seat number above our heads, this is 4A." He gestured upward to the illuminated seat marker that clearly displayed 4A. Heather's lips pressed into a thin line. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but—" "I'm not frustrated," Malcolm interrupted, careful to keep his tone conversational, though his heart pounded against his ribs. "I'm simply stating facts. This is my assigned seat." The airline supervisor, a middle-aged woman with a nameplate reading Angela, made her way down the aisle, her expression clearly communicating her annoyance at having to board the plane to resolve what should have been a simple seating issue. "What seems to be the problem here?" she asked, addressing no one in particular. James jumped in immediately. "This gentleman is insisting on having the window seat, but the lady is already seated and says she can't move easily due to medication issues." Angela turned to Malcolm, her gaze assessing and slightly suspicious. "Sir, can I see your boarding pass, please?" Again, Malcolm handed over his boarding pass, which had already been verified multiple times. Angela examined it with the same unnecessary scrutiny Heather had shown earlier. "And ma'am, may I see yours?" she asked Diane, her tone notably softer. Diane handed over her boarding pass with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what game she was playing. "I'm supposed to be in 4C, but I was certain this was it. I've taken my medication already, which makes moving rather difficult." Angela looked at both boarding passes, then at the seat markers. "Sir, it appears there's been a misunderstanding. While your pass does say 4A, perhaps for today you could." "No," Malcolm stated firmly. "I'm not accepting a different seat when I'm holding the correct boarding pass for this one." A murmur rippled through the cabin. From the corner of his eye, Malcolm could see Rachel, still recording discreetly, her phone partially obscured by her purse, but unmistakably capturing the entire exchange. Sir Angela continued lowering her voice as though sharing a confidence, though everyone nearby could still hear. "I understand this is inconvenient, but in the interest of keeping our departure on schedule, could you please cooperate?" The subtext was clear. "You're the problem here. You're causing the delay. You're being difficult." Malcolm felt a flash of memory himself, at 12, being followed by a store clerk as he shopped for his grandmother's birthday present, at 17 being asked for additional ID when cashing his first paycheck, at 23 being mistaken for kitchen staff at his first tech conference despite wearing a presenter badge. The pattern was exhaustingly familiar. "I've cooperated by purchasing a ticket, arriving on time, and expecting to sit in my assigned seat," Malcolm replied evenly. "I'm not the one creating an issue here." From farther back in the cabin, a male voice called out, "Just take the other seat so we can get going." Another joined in. "Some people always have to make everything difficult." Malcolm didn't turn to identify the speakers. He didn't need to. He kept his gaze locked on Angela, refusing to be baited into showing the anger building inside him. Every fiber of his being wanted to raise his voice to demand the basic respect of having his ticket honored without question. But he knew that a raised voice from him would instantly transform the narrative from a passenger rightfully claiming his seat to an aggressive black man making people uncomfortable. The young black boy was still watching from economy, his eyes wide, absorbing every second of the confrontation. Malcolm thought about what message his actions were sending. If he gave in, what would that teach the child about standing up for himself in a world that constantly expected him to back down? "I have an important meeting in Washington tomorrow," Malcolm explained, conscious of how he was being forced to justify himself. "I specifically selected a window seat so I could work during the flight without being disturbed." "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for the seat I paid for." Diane shifted in the seat, his seat, and spoke up with a performative sigh. "He's been quite aggressive about this whole situation. I feel rather uncomfortable." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Malcolm hadn't raised his voice or made any threatening movements yet. With a few carefully chosen words, Diane had painted him as the threat. Angela's posture changed immediately, her body angling slightly away from Malcolm. "Sir, I need to ask you to calm down." "I am calm," Malcolm replied, fighting to keep the frustration from his voice. "I haven't raised my voice or been aggressive in any way." "Well, the lady feels threatened," James added, moving slightly closer to Diane in a protective gesture that made Malcolm want to laugh bitterly. Here was the script playing out exactly as expected. Black man labeled as threatening for simply standing his ground. White woman positioned as victim, needing protection. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've been informed of our delay. If we cannot resolve this seating issue promptly, we'll need to return to the gate, which will result in significant delays for everyone." The implication was clear. Malcolm was now being positioned as the reason an entire plane full of passengers might miss connections or appointments. The pressure to cave was enormous. Rachel's phone was still recording. Several other passengers had their phones out now too, sensing a potential viral moment in the making. Malcolm was acutely aware that whatever happened next would likely be viewed by thousands, possibly millions of people, most of whom would never know the full context of what had transpired before they started filming. His mind raced to the Pentagon meeting. If this flight was delayed significantly, or if he was removed from the plane, a possibility that seemed increasingly likely as the confrontation continued, he might miss his connection to Washington. The contract that could transform his company and prove that bias-free security technology was possible might go to rival tech instead. Years of work, his team's dedication, his vision for changing how security AI treated people of color, all of it hung in the balance. Angela lowered her voice further, speaking directly to Malcolm. "Sir, if you can't cooperate, we may need to have you removed from the flight." And there it was, the ultimate threat. Comply or be publicly humiliated further by being escorted off the plane, possibly by airport security, creating exactly the kind of scene that would reinforce the stereotypes he had spent his life defying. Malcolm looked at the young black boy again, their eyes meeting briefly across the cabin. The child's expression had shifted from curiosity to something like concern. Perhaps he'd witnessed similar situations before, or perhaps he was simply absorbing a lesson about what happens when someone who looks like him stands up for themselves. In that moment, faced with impossible options and aware of what was at stake, Malcolm Thompson, CEO of NextGen Solutions, developer of revolutionary security, AI, and self-made success story, felt utterly powerless. Have you ever witnessed a moment when the balance of power suddenly shifts? When a single voice changes everything? That's exactly what was about to happen on Flight 2187. As Malcolm stood in the aisle surrounded by hostile stares and the threat of being removed from the plane, a voice cut through the tension from 3 rows back. "Excuse me," said a man in seat 7B, raising his hand slightly as he unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. "I think there's something everyone should know." All eyes turned to the speaker, a white man in his mid-30s wearing a crisp button-down shirt and horn-rimmed glasses. Tyler Jenkins, senior project manager at a consulting firm, had been silently watching the confrontation unfold. "I was one of the first people to board," Tyler continued, his voice steady and clear. "And I saw this gentleman," he gestured to Malcolm, "sitting in that window seat when I walked in. The woman took his seat when he got up to put his bag in the overhead compartment. I watched it happen." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Angela's expression shifted subtly as she processed this new information. "Are you certain about that, sir?" she asked, her tone suddenly more professional than it had been seconds earlier. "Absolutely certain," Tyler confirmed. He was seated first. She moved into his seat when he stood up. Diane's cheeks flushed red, but she maintained her composure. "That's simply not true. I've been in this seat the whole time. This gentleman must have confused his seat assignment. I know what I saw." Tyler insisted, meeting Diane's gaze directly. "And I'm not the only one who noticed." As if on cue, a woman in row 5 spoke up. "He's right. I saw it too." Another passenger nodded in agreement. The lady definitely took his seat when he got up. Rachel, still recording, had repositioned herself for a better angle, no longer attempting to be discreet. The viral moment was taking a dramatic turn. Malcolm noticed the pilot standing at the cockpit door, now observing the situation with a frown. Their eyes met briefly, and Malcolm saw something like recognition in the man's gaze, not of Malcolm personally, but of the situation itself. Angela turned back to examine both boarding passes more carefully. "Ma'am, could I see your pass again, please?" Diane handed it over, her confident demeanor beginning to crack. I don't understand why this is becoming such an issue. I'm sure we could resolve this amicably if certain people weren't being so difficult. By certain people, who exactly do you mean? Tyler asked, his voice carrying just enough edge to make the implication clear to everyone listening. Diane flushed deeper. I simply meant... I think we all know what you meant, Tyler interrupted, earning nods from several passengers. Angela was scrutinizing Diane's boarding pass with newfound attention. Her eyes widened slightly as she noticed something she had missed before. Ma'am, she said, her tone completely transformed. This boarding pass is for flight 2193, not 2187. That's our Chicago to Washington, D.C. direct flight, not this flight to Atlanta. The cabin went silent. That can't be right, Diane stammered, reaching for the pass. Angela held it firmly, pointing to the flight number. It's clearly printed right here. You're on the wrong aircraft entirely. Malcolm watched as Diane's expression cycled through confusion, embarrassment, and then most tellingly, calculation. She wasn't surprised. She was caught. This is outrageous, Diane blustered, gathering her belongings hurriedly. I was directed to this gate. Someone gave me incorrect information. But her performance was faltering. As she stood to exit the seat, Malcolm's seat, a business card fell from her purse. Rachel, still filming, zoomed in as James picked it up. Rival Tech James read aloud, offering the card back to Diane. Is that a technology company? Malcolm's eyes locked onto the card, understanding dawning instantly. Rival Tech is my company's main competitor, he said, the pieces falling into place. We're both bidding on the same Pentagon contract tomorrow morning. The implication hung in the air for a moment before Tyler connected the dots aloud. Wait, are you saying she deliberately took your seat to cause a delay? To make you miss your meeting? Diane snatched her card back from James, her composure completely shattered. That's absurd. This was clearly just a mix-up with the gates. But her hasty denial only confirmed the suspicion. Malcolm could see it in her eyes. She'd been caught executing a desperate corporate sabotage attempt. Angela's professional mask slipped for a moment, genuine shock registering on her face. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings and come with me. This situation requires documentation. As Diane was escorted off the plane, passengers murmured and whispered, some openly recording the resolution of the confrontation. Heather and James stood awkwardly by avoiding eye contact with Malcolm. Their earlier dismissive treatment of him now glaringly inappropriate. Malcolm finally took his rightful seat by the window, the vinyl still warm from Diane's occupation. He felt a complex mixture of vindication and residual humiliation. Yes, the truth had come out, but why had it taken an external white validator like Tyler for his word to be believed? Why had multiple airline employees automatically assumed he was in the wrong? The young black boy in economy was still watching his expression now, one of cautious triumph. Malcolm gave him a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of what they both understood about the world and how it worked. As the plane prepared for takeoff, now nearly 90 minutes behind schedule, Angela returned to offer a formal apology. Mr. Thompson, on behalf of the airline, I want to sincerely apologize for this incident. We'll be offering compensation for the inconvenience, and we're documenting everything regarding the other passengers' actions. Malcolm nodded, accepting the apology with the same grace he had shown throughout the confrontation. Thank you. I appreciate that. But the words felt hollow. The inconvenience Angela referred to wasn't just about a delayed flight or a seat mix-up. It was about being automatically disbelieved, about having to fight for basic respect, about the exhaustion of navigating spaces where your presence was constantly questioned. As the plane finally taxied toward the runway, Malcolm gazed out the window at the Chicago skyline, thinking about the meeting tomorrow and what had nearly been lost because of one woman's desperate attempt at corporate sabotage and an entire system ready to believe the worst about him. What would you have done in Malcolm's situation? Would you have stood your ground like he did or given in to avoid the confrontation? Comment number 1 if you believe Malcolm handled the situation perfectly, or number 2 if you think he should have taken the other seat to avoid the delay. Have you ever witnessed racial profiling firsthand? Like this video if you appreciate how Tyler Jenkins stood up as an ally instead of staying silent. Subscribe to hear how this incident impacts Malcolm's crucial Pentagon meeting in the next part of this incredible true story. As Flight 2187 reached cruising altitude, the full impact of what had just transpired began to sink in for everyone on board. Flight attendants Heather and James moved through the cabin with uncharacteristic humility, offering complimentary drinks and snacks with averted eyes. The tension had dissipated, but in its place hung a palpable awkwardness, the collective discomfort of people forced to confront an ugly truth about their assumptions. Malcolm sipped the sparkling water he'd requested, his mind racing despite his outwardly calm demeanor. The Pentagon meeting was still on track. He would make his connection in Atlanta, assuming no further delays, but the incident had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. Not because it was unusual, but precisely because it wasn't. Angela returned to his seat, kneeling in the aisle to speak with him at eye level, a gesture of respect noticeably absent during the confrontation. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice low enough to offer some privacy, "I want to provide you with an update on the situation." Malcolm nodded, waiting. "The woman, Miss Bennett, has admitted that she works for Rivaltech and recognized you from industry events," Angela continued. "She claims it was her own initiative, not a company directive, but that seems unlikely," Malcolm finished for her. "Yes," Angela agreed. "We've documented everything. Airport security is questioning her now, and the airline will be filing a formal report. If you wish to press charges for harassment or pursue any other legal action, we'll fully cooperate." Malcolm considered the offer. Legal action would create headlines, generate publicity for NextGen, and potentially damage Rivaltech's reputation. It might even sway the Pentagon's decision. But it would also mean extending this incident, reliving it through depositions and possible court appearances. "I'll have our legal team review the options," he replied diplomatically. "For now, I'd appreciate a written incident report I can share with them." Of course, Angela nodded. "And again, we deeply apologize for how this situation was handled initially. It was inexcusable." As Angela moved away, Malcolm's phone vibrated with an incoming call from Tariq, his chief operating officer. He'd texted Tarek briefly about the incident while the plane was still at the gate, but hadn't had time for details. "I need to take this," he told the passenger beside him, rising to walk to the small privacy area near the lavatory. "Malcolm, what the hell happened?" Tarek asked immediately. "Some video is already circulating on Twitter. Number First Class While Black is trending." Malcolm closed his eyes briefly. "Of course it was. Diane Bennett from Rivaltech recognized me at the airport. She boarded our plane with a ticket for a completely different flight, took my seat when I got up to store my bag, then created a scene claiming I was being aggressive when I asked for my seat back." Jesus, Tariq breathed. Corporate espionage doesn't usually get that desperate or obvious. "They're scared," Malcolm said simply. "Our algorithm is better, and they know it. Pentagon's technical team probably already told them as much." "So, what happened?" "The video I saw cuts in halfway through the confrontation." Malcolm recounted the entire incident, including Tyler Jenkins' intervention and the revelation of Diane's Rivaltech connection. "This could actually work in our favor," Tariq said thoughtfully. "If Rivaltech is desperate enough to try something this blatant, the Pentagon should know about it." "Agreed, but let's be strategic," Malcolm cautioned. "I don't want this incident to overshadow our technology. The algorithm should stand on its own merits." After ending the call, Malcolm returned to his seat and opened his laptop, intending to review his presentation once more. But a notification popped up on his screen, an email from Rachel, the passenger who had been recording. "Mr. Thompson," it read, "I'm an independent journalist with The Digital Citizen. I captured the entire incident on your flight today. Before I publish anything, I wanted to offer you the opportunity to comment. What happened to you today is exactly why we need more diverse perspectives in technology, especially in security systems. I'd appreciate your insights." She'd included a link to her preliminary footage. Malcolm clicked watching the incident from an external perspective for the first time. It was jarring to see himself standing in the aisle, maintaining his composure while surrounded by hostile or suspicious faces. The camera caught what he couldn't see. In the moment, the subtle eye rolls from other passengers. When he first stated his case, the protective positioning James had taken beside Diane, the silent exchange of glances between flight attendants that clearly communicated their assumptions about who was causing the problem. Most revealing was the transformation after Tyler spoke up. The immediate shift in Angela's demeanor, the way other passengers suddenly felt comfortable confirming what they'd seen, the rapid erosion of Diane's credibility once a white man challenged her version of events. Malcolm saved the video but closed the email without responding immediately. He would need to consult with NextGen's PR team first. A light tap on his shoulder interrupted his thoughts. It was Tyler Jenkins standing in the aisle. "Sorry to disturb you," Tyler said quietly. "I just wanted to introduce myself properly. Tyler Jenkins." Malcolm stood to shake his hand. "Malcolm Thompson. Thank you for speaking up back there." Tyler's expression turned serious. "Don't thank me. I should have said something sooner." He hesitated. "The truth is, I've seen situations like that before and stayed silent. It's easier, not to get involved." "I know exactly how that works," Malcolm replied, the weight of unsaid understanding passing between them. "It's different when you're the one experiencing it versus just witnessing it." Tyler acknowledged. "I can walk away from an incident like that and forget about it by dinner. You don't have that luxury." Malcolm appreciated the man's self-awareness. "Most people never make the connection you just did." "Listen," Tyler said, lowering his voice further, "I've got the whole thing on my phone too. If you need another copy for any reason, legal action, whatever, it's yours." "I appreciate that," Malcolm said sincerely. As Tyler returned to his seat, Heather approached with uncharacteristic deference. "Mr. Thompson, the captain, would like to speak with you when you have a moment." Malcolm raised an eyebrow, but followed her to the cockpit door where Captain Rivera, a veteran pilot with salt and pepper hair, waited. "Mr. Thompson," the captain said, extending his hand, "I wanted to personally apologize for what happened. I observed part of the incident from here and should have intervened sooner." "Thank you," Captain Malcolm replied, somewhat surprised by the gesture. "I've been flying for 30 years, Captain Rivera continued, "and I've seen too many incidents like this. It's unacceptable." He paused. "My daughter is in computer science at Georgia Tech. She talks about the diversity problems in tech all the time. Seeing what happened to you today, it made it real in a different way." The conversation was interrupted by a text alert on Malcolm's phone, another message from Tariq. "The incident is all over social media now. Rival Tech stock dropped 3% in the last hour as rumors spread about what Diane did. Our PR team is being flooded with interview requests for you." Malcolm put his phone away, thanked the captain, and returned to his seat, feeling the familiar weight of being both a CEO and a black man in America. How the two identities were never truly separate. How his personal experiences were inevitably tied to his professional life. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, Malcolm gazed out at the clouds and considered what had nearly been lost today. Not just a seat on a plane, but potentially a contract that represented the culmination of years of work. All because one company couldn't stand the idea of a black-founded firm winning a government contract with superior technology. The irony wasn't lost on him. NextGen's algorithm was specifically designed to eliminate the kind of bias that had been directed at him personally today. The Pentagon contract would put that technology into systems that affected millions of lives, potentially reducing the digital discrimination that disproportionately flagged people of color as security risks. Diane Bennett and Rivaltech hadn't just attempted to sabotage a business competitor. They had tried to prevent technology that could reduce systemic bias from reaching implementation. The personal and the political, the individual and the institutional, all converged in Seat 4A of Flight 2187. As the plane touched down in Atlanta, Malcolm made a decision. He would not let this incident be buried or minimized. Not because of personal vindication, but because it illuminated the very problem his company was trying to solve: how bias operated at every level of society, from airline seats to security algorithms, and how those with privilege, often couldn't even see it until it was explicitly pointed out. The seatbelt sign dinged off. As passengers began gathering their belongings, Malcolm noticed several looking in his direction with newfound respect or curiosity. Word had spread throughout the cabin about who he was and what Diane had attempted to do. The young black boy from Economy appeared in the aisle, his mother guiding him toward the exit. As they passed Malcolm's seat, the boy paused. "My mom says, you make computers that are fair," he said simply. Malcolm smiled genuinely for the first time since boarding. "That's exactly what I try to do." The boy nodded solemnly before his mother ushered him forward, giving Malcolm an appreciative glance over her shoulder. As Malcolm prepared to deplane, his phone buzzed with a notification from his news app, Rivaltech exec, detained at O'Hare corporate espionage allegations surface in Pentagon contract race. The story was just beginning. The Atlanta airport hummed with activity as Malcolm made his way from Concourse B to Concourse D, where his connecting flight to Washington, D.C. would depart in just over an hour. Under normal circumstances, the layover would have felt comfortable, but after the 90-minute delay in Chicago, he found himself moving with purpose through the crowded terminal. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since landing. Emails, text calls, and social media notifications poured in as news of the incident spread. Number First Class While Black had rocketed to the top trending spot on Twitter, with Rachel's initial clip already surpassing 2 million views. Commentators were dissecting every moment: Diane's calculated deception, the flight attendant's biased response, Tyler's intervention, and Malcolm's dignified composure throughout. NextGen's PR director, Amara, had called 3 times already. This is simultaneously a PR nightmare and opportunity, she'd explained when he finally answered. Your personal experience directly validates the problem your technology solves. We're getting interview requests from every major network. Malcolm had instructed her to hold off on any official statements until after tomorrow's Pentagon meeting. The technology should speak for itself, he insisted. I don't want this to become a circus that overshadows what we've built. As he approached his gate, a notification from the airline app flashed on his screen. Weather alert. Turbulence expected. Departure delayed 45 minutes. Malcolm felt a flicker of anxiety. The Pentagon meeting was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. A 45-minute delay would still get him to D.C. with plenty of time, but any further complications could put him in jeopardy. He was checking alternative flight options when his phone rang again. A Washington, D.C. number he didn't recognize. Malcolm Thompson, he answered crisply. Mr. Thompson, this is Colonel Lisa Reed from the Pentagon Cybersecurity Division, came the response. I'm calling regarding tomorrow's presentation. Malcolm tensed. Had news of the incident already reached the Pentagon? Was this a courtesy call to reschedule, or something worse? Yes, Colonel Reed. I'm currently in Atlanta with a connecting flight to D.C. this evening. "That's actually why I'm calling," she replied. "We've been monitoring the weather situation. There's a significant storm front moving up the eastern seaboard. All flights into Reagan National and Dulles will likely be grounded by 8 p.m. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, processing this new complication. "I see. Does this mean we need to reschedule the meeting?" "Actually, we've already rescheduled it," Colonel Reed informed him. "The evaluation committee has pushed all presentations back 24 hours due to the weather. Yours is now scheduled for Wednesday at 9 a.m. Relief washed over him. "Thank you for letting me know." "Of course," she replied, then hesitated briefly. "On an unrelated note, Mr. Thompson, we've become aware of an incident involving a representative from Rivaltech today. While I can't comment officially, I want to assure you that the Pentagon takes corporate ethics very seriously in our contracting decisions." Malcolm processed the implied message. "I appreciate that, Colonel." After ending the call, he found an empty seat at the gate and allowed himself a moment to exhale fully for the first time since the confrontation. The delay was actually a blessing, time to regroup, to process what had happened, and to incorporate this experience into tomorrow's presentation if he chose to. A notification alerted him to a new email from Rachel. The journalist Mr. Thompson attached is the complete unedited footage of the incident. "Regardless of whether you choose to comment for my piece, I wanted you to have this for your records. What happened today matters beyond this specific incident." Malcolm watched the video again, this time with the luxury of distance. The systematic bias was even more apparent. How Heather had immediately asked to see his boarding pass but taken Diane's word at face value. How James had physically positioned himself as though Malcolm were a threat. How other passengers had assumed he was causing trouble simply by advocating for himself. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. "Diana, just saw what happened. Are you okay? Really okay?" Diana understood the toll these incidents took, the emotional labor of maintaining composure while being dehumanized. As a black woman in medicine, she was chief of neurology at Chicago Memorial. She navigated similar terrain daily. "Better now," he replied honestly. "Meeting postponed due to weather. We'll call when I check into the hotel." The gate agent announced that due to the weather delays, the airline was providing meal vouchers. As Malcolm stood to collect his, a man approached Tyler Jenkins, his unexpected ally from the flight. "Looks like we're both stuck here a while longer," Tyler observed. "Mind if I join you for dinner? My next flight's not until tomorrow morning now." Over plates of mediocre airport pasta, Malcolm and Tyler delved into a conversation that quickly transcended the day's events. "I've been thinking about what happened," Tyler said, twirling spaghetti around his fork. "Not just on the plane, but my own reaction to it. Why did it take me so long to speak up?" "Most people never speak up at all," Malcolm pointed out. "That's not exactly a high bar," Tyler replied with a self-deprecating smile. "The thing is, I saw what was happening immediately. I recognized the pattern. But there's this calculation that happens. Will speaking up make things worse? Will I be targeted next? Is it worth it?" Malcolm nodded. "That calculation is familiar just from the other side. Every confrontation involves the same mental math. Stand up for yourself and risk escalation, or let it go, and keep the peace at the cost of your dignity. The difference is, I get to choose when to engage," Tyler acknowledged. "You don't have that luxury." "Exactly." Malcolm set down his fork. "And that's actually at the heart of what my company does. Our security algorithm is designed to eliminate those biases, to make decisions based on actual behavior patterns rather than demographic profiles." Tyler leaned forward, genuinely interested. "How does that work exactly?" As Malcolm explained the technical fundamentals of NextGen's approach to AI security, he found himself articulating connections between his personal experience and his professional work that he'd never explicitly voiced. Before, the conversation flowed naturally from algorithmic bias to lived experience, from technical challenges to social implications. The real breakthrough came when we stopped treating bias as a technical problem to solve and started treating it as a fundamental reality to account for, Malcolm explained. Traditional security AI is built on historical data that's already biased. It's garbage in, garbage out. We had to completely reimagine the architecture. That's fascinating, Tyler said sincerely, and incredibly important work. Their conversation was interrupted by another notification on Malcolm's phone, a text from Rachel Story going live in 30 minutes. Last chance for comment. Malcolm hesitated, then showed the message to Tyler. What do you think? Should I comment or let the footage speak for itself? Tyler considered the question carefully. It depends on what story you want told. Without your voice, others will control the narrative. The observation resonated. Throughout his career, Malcolm had let his work speak for itself, avoiding the spotlight that often came with being one of the few black executives in tech. But there was power in controlling your own narrative, in ensuring your perspective wasn't lost or distorted. "Excuse me," a timid voice interrupted. They looked up to see the young black boy from the plane standing beside their table with his mother. "I'm sorry to interrupt your dinner," the woman said. "I'm Tanya Williams, and this is my son Jaden. He hasn't stopped talking about what happened on the plane, and when we saw you sitting here." "I want to be like you when I grow up," Jaden blurted out, clutching a notebook. "I'm learning to code already. Could you sign this for me?" Malcolm felt a swell of emotion as he took the notebook. This was why the work mattered. Not just the algorithm itself, but what it represented for kids like Jaden watching and absorbing lessons about who belongs in which spaces and whose word is believed. "What kind of coding are you learning?" Malcolm asked as he signed the notebook with an encouraging message. "Python," Jaden replied enthusiastically. "I'm making a game about space exploration." As they chatted about coding, Malcolm made a spontaneous decision. "Jaden, how would you like to visit NextGen's headquarters sometime? See how professional software development works?" The boy's eyes widened. "Really? That would be amazing." After exchanging contact information with Tanya, Malcolm watched them walk away. Jaden, clutching his notebook as though it contained the secrets of the universe. "That," Tyler observed quietly, "is why your voice matters in this story." Malcolm nodded, making his decision. He picked up his phone and called Rachel. "I'd like to provide a statement," he told her. "Not just about what happened today, but about why it matters and how it connects to the larger issues of bias in technology." As he crafted his statement with Rachel, Malcolm realized that the incident, painful and infuriating as it had been, had crystallized something important. His personal experience and professional mission weren't separate aspects of his life. They were inextricably connected. The algorithms he built were shaped by the experiences he'd lived. Later that evening, checked into his hotel room in Atlanta, Malcolm finally called Diana. "I saw your statement in the article," she said, instead of hello. "It was powerful. Do you think I made the right call, addressing it publicly?" "Absolutely," Diana replied without hesitation. "You transformed a humiliating experience into a teachable moment. That's not just good PR, it's leadership." As they talked, Malcolm's laptop chimed with an incoming email, a message from his entire development team at NextGen expressing their support and pride. The subject line read simply, "This is why we do the work." Lying in bed that night, Malcolm reflected on the day's extraordinary trajectory. What had begun as a routine business trip had become a public referendum on the very biases his company's technology aimed to eliminate. The Pentagon meeting was still ahead, but something fundamental had shifted in his approach to it. Tomorrow, he wouldn't just be presenting an algorithm. He would be presenting a vision for a world where technology didn't amplify human biases, but helped to dismantle them. A vision made all the more urgent by what had transpired in Seat 4A. The morning sun streamed through the hotel room curtains as Malcolm completed his third mile on the treadmill, sweat beading on his forehead. Exercise had always been his refuge. a space where strategic thinking flowed more easily as his body worked through the physical strain. Today, he needed that clarity more than ever. His phone propped on the treadmill's console displayed a cascade of notifications that had accumulated overnight. The incident had exploded beyond anything he could have anticipated. Rachel's article, titled "Discrimination at 30000 Feet: How a Black CEO's Airline Confrontation Exposes Tech's Bias Problem," had been picked up by major news outlets. Number First Class While Black now had over 10 million impressions. Rival Tech stock had plummeted 12% at market opening. NextGen was trending on LinkedIn, with tech professionals expressing both support and skepticism about Malcolm's claims regarding bias-free security algorithms. As he stepped off the treadmill and toweled off Malcolm's phone, rang Tariq again, his fifth call since dawn. "Have you seen the board's emails?" Tariq asked without preamble when Malcolm answered. "Not yet. I've been exercising. Half of them want you to capitalize on this publicity wave, use it to highlight our technology and philosophy. Davidson called it a marketing opportunity we couldn't buy for $1 billion. Malcolm grimaced. Richard Davidson, their lead investor, always thought in terms of marketing opportunities. And the other half, he asked, though he already knew. Worried about backlash. Concerned we'll be labeled the race company instead of the best security company. Spencer suggested we focus exclusively on the corporate espionage angle and downplay the racial element entirely. Walter Spencer, their most conservative board member, had always been uncomfortable with any direct discussion of race, preferring to frame everything in terms of merit and excellence. "What do you think?" Malcolm asked, valuing Tariq's perspective as both COO and friend. Tariq hesitated. "Professionally speaking, this is the most attention NextGen has ever received. Ignoring it would be a mistake. Personally speaking, this matters beyond business, Malcolm. What happened to you happens to people who don't have your platform every day." After showering and dressing in his backup suit, charcoal gray Hugo Boss, rather than the Navy Tom Ford, still in Chicago, Malcolm sat at the desk in his hotel room facing the dilemma head-on. The Pentagon presentation was tomorrow. His original slides were polished, technical, and focused exclusively on NextGen's algorithm and its superior performance metrics. But now, after yesterday's incident and the public conversation it had sparked, that approach felt insufficient. Sterile. Divorced from the real-world implications that made the technology so necessary in the first place. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, Mr. Thompson Gerald Williams from Rival Tech. "This situation has escalated unnecessarily. I'd appreciate a private conversation about how we might resolve matters amicably." Malcolm stared at the message, a mixture of disbelief and anger rising in his chest. After Diane's blatant attempt at sabotage, Williams wanted an amicable resolution. The subtext was clear. "Let's keep this quiet. Let's make it go away." Before he could respond, or decide whether to respond at all, another message appeared. This one from Tyler Jenkins. "Just saw a Rival Tech statement claiming Diane Bennett was acting independently, without company knowledge or approval. Convenient scapegoating. I'm happy to go on record about what I witnessed, if it helps." Rival Tech was already in damage control mode, throwing Diane under the bus while trying to salvage their reputation and Pentagon bid. It was predictable corporate theater, but effective if left unchallenged. Malcolm's laptop chimed with an incoming video call, Diana checking in from Chicago before her morning rounds at the hospital. "You look exhausted," she observed as her face appeared on screen, concern evident in her eyes. "I'm fine," he assured her automatically. Diana raised an eyebrow, seeing through the practiced response. "Malcolm," he sighed, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. "I'm trying to decide how to approach tomorrow's presentation. The original version is safe, technical impressive, on its merits. But after yesterday, you're wondering if you should address what happened directly. Diana finished for him. Make it personal. Exactly. The Pentagon team will have seen the news. They'll be thinking about it whether I mention it or not. But if I do, you risk being seen as playing the race card, Diana said, making air quotes around the phrase they both despised. While if I don't, I miss an opportunity to connect the dots between personal experience and technological innovation. Malcolm leaned back in his chair. The algorithm exists precisely because of experiences like yesterday's. The biases built into current systems didn't appear from nowhere. They reflect the same biases that made those flight attendants automatically suspect me and believe her. Diana nodded thoughtfully. You've always kept your personal experiences separate from your professional presentations. Is that still serving you? The question hung between them, challenging and profound. Another notification appeared, an email from Colonel Reed at the Pentagon. Mr. Thompson, in light of recent events, several additional officials have expressed interest in attending tomorrow's presentation. The venue has been moved to Conference Room Alpha to accommodate the larger audience. Please arrive 30 minutes early for enhanced security protocols. Enhanced interest. Enhanced security protocols. The subtext was clear. His presentation had become a higher-profile event within the Pentagon itself. A knock at the hotel room door interrupted his thoughts. When Malcolm opened it, a uniformed delivery person handed him a small package. Inside was a flash drive and a note on Rival Tech letterhead. Mr. Thompson, enclosed is information about significant security vulnerabilities in your algorithm that our team has identified. We're prepared to withhold this from the Pentagon Evaluation Committee in exchange for a mutual non-disparagement agreement regarding yesterday's unfortunate incident. We all make mistakes. Gerald Williams, CEO. Malcolm stared at the flash drive, anger and disbelief warring within him. This wasn't just corporate espionage anymore, it was outright blackmail. What is it? Diana asked from the laptop screen, noticing his expression. Malcolm held up the flash drive and note for her to see through the camera. Rival Tech's trying to blackmail me into silence. Diana's expression hardened. They're desperate, which means they know your technology is better. Or they're bluffing about vulnerabilities to create doubt, Malcolm countered. Either way, it's another tactic to undermine us because they can't compete fairly. As he spoke, another email notification appeared, this one from Jaden Williams's mother, Mr. Thompson. I wanted to share something with you. After meeting you yesterday, Jaden stayed up late researching your company. This morning he told me he wants to start a coding club at his school, specifically for Black and brown kids interested in technology. Your example is already creating ripples. Thank you for standing your ground yesterday. Attached was a photo of Jaden proudly holding his signed notebook beside a hand-drawn poster that read, Future Tech Leaders Club. Malcolm felt something shift inside him as he stared at Jaden's hopeful face. This wasn't just about algorithms or Pentagon contracts or corporate rivalries. It was about who got to belong in which spaces, whose voice was heard, whose contributions were valued, and who would shape the technology that increasingly governed access and opportunity in society. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. When they try to make you small, stand especially tall. Rose Thompson had marched with Dr. King, and Selma had integrated her office at General Motors in the 1,970 seconds, had raised Malcolm to understand that excellence was both a personal goal and a communal responsibility. I need to incorporate what happened into the presentation, Malcolm said, finally looking at Diana. Not as a complaint or an accusation, but as context for why our approach to technology matters. Diana nodded, pride evident in her expression. It's the right call. They're expecting a sales pitch. Give them a vision instead. After ending the call with Diana, Malcolm opened his presentation file and began restructuring it completely. The technical specifications and performance metrics remained, but now they were framed within a larger narrative about how biased systems, whether human or algorithmic, created real-world barriers and dangers. As he worked, his phone continued buzzing with notifications, PR opportunities, interview requests, messages of support, and inevitably racially charged criticism from anonymous accounts claiming he was playing victim or making everything about race. By late afternoon, Malcolm had transformed his presentation and made a series of decisions about NextGen's public response to the incident. He would not sign Rivaltech's non-disparagement agreement. He would not accept their attempt to buy his silence. He would address the incident directly in tomorrow's Pentagon presentation, not as a tangential personal anecdote, but as a central illustration of why bias-free security technology was so critically important. As evening approached, Malcolm closed his laptop and stood at the hotel room window, gazing out at the Atlanta skyline. Tomorrow would determine not just the future of NextGen, but potentially the future of security technology itself, whether it would perpetuate existing biases or begin to dismantle them. His phone buzzed one final time for the day. A message from Tyler. Whatever you decide about tomorrow's presentation, remember, you're not just speaking for yourself. Malcolm thought of Jaden's hopeful face, of his grandmother's legacy, of all the people who would never have the platform he now possessed. Tyler was right. This wasn't just about winning a contract. It was about changing the conversation entirely. Dawn broke over Washington, D.C., painting the Capitol Dome and Washington Monument in hues of gold and amber as Malcolm's taxi navigated the early morning traffic. He'd slept surprisingly well, the clarity of his decision bringing a calm resolve that transcended the stakes of the day ahead. The ride from his hotel to the Pentagon gave him time to center himself, to move from the emotional turmoil of the past 48 hours into the focused mindset required for the presentation. The familiar weight of his laptop bag against his knee reminded him of all the work, all the innovation, all the late nights and breakthroughs that had led to this moment. His phone vibrated. A text from Tariq: "Teams behind you 100%, whatever approach you take. Knock 'em dead, boss." Another notification followed immediately, an email from Gerald Williams at Rivaltech. "Thompson, final chance to accept our mutual non-disclosure offer. Our presentation is scheduled right after yours. Choose wisely." Malcolm deleted the email without responding. Rivaltech's tactics, from Diane's attempted sabotage to this morning's thinly veiled threat, only reinforced his conviction that today's presentation needed to address bias directly, not just in algorithms, but in the tech industry's culture itself. The Pentagon loomed ahead, its distinctive five-sided structure housing the nerve center of America's defense infrastructure. As the taxi approached the visitor's entrance, Malcolm caught sight of a small group of protesters gathered near the security checkpoint, holding signs reading "TECH without bias" and number "First Class While Black." Someone had organized a demonstration in response to the airline incident. The security screening was thorough but efficient. Malcolm presented his ID and invitation letter, submitted to a retinal scan, and was escorted by a uniformed officer through a series of checkpoints. The enhanced protocols Colonel Reed had mentioned were evident in the additional verification steps and the presence of more senior security personnel than usual for contractor presentations. Mr. Thompson, Colonel Reed greeted him as he entered a waiting area adjacent to Conference Room Alpha. "Thank you for your punctuality." Reed was a compact woman in her 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the erect posture of a career military officer. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct. "We've had to make some adjustments to today's schedule," she informed him. "Your presentation will now be attended by representatives from several additional departments, including the Office of Civil Rights and the Algorithmic Accountability Division." Malcolm nodded, processing this information. The incident had clearly elevated interest beyond the immediate security contract. Also, Reed continued, lowering her voice slightly, "General Richardson has decided to attend personally." Malcolm's eyebrows rose involuntarily. General Elise Richardson was the highest-ranking black woman in the history of the U.S. Army and currently served as the Pentagon's chief of cybersecurity operations. Her presence at a contractor presentation was highly unusual. "I understand," Malcolm replied, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the unexpected development. "One more thing," Reed added, glancing at her tablet. "Rivaltech has requested to observe your presentation. As per our protocols, competitive bidders are allowed to attend each other's presentations at this stage, but only with mutual consent. You're entitled to refuse." Malcolm considered the request. Having Gerald Williams and his team in the audience would add another layer of pressure, another set of critical eyes watching for any vulnerability or misstep. But refusing might suggest fear or uncertainty about next-gen's technology. "They're welcome to attend," Malcolm decided. "Transparency serves everyone's interests." Reed nodded approvingly. "Very well. You have approximately 15 minutes before we begin. There's water and coffee available if you need it." Left alone in the waiting area, Malcolm opened his laptop one final time to review the completely restructured presentation he'd created yesterday. Gone was the sterile, purely technical approach that kept the human element at arm's length. Instead, he had crafted something that integrated personal experience with technological innovation that drew explicit connections between the biases of human systems and their algorithmic counterparts. It was a risk. The Pentagon was a conservative institution generally more comfortable with technical specifications than discussions of systemic bias. But after the airline incident and its viral spread, pretending those conversations weren't happening would be both disingenuous and a missed opportunity. His phone vibrated with a calendar alert 15 minutes until the presentation began. Malcolm closed his laptop, took a deep breath, and made his final decision. He would not hide behind technical jargon or sanitized corporate language. He would speak plainly about next-gen's technology and why it mattered not just for national security, but for basic human dignity in an increasingly automated world. As he gathered his materials, Malcolm noticed a text message from Tyler Jenkins. "Remember that kid on the plane? You're speaking for him today." The image of Jaden's hopeful face flashed in Malcolm's mind, strengthening his resolve. This presentation wasn't just about winning a contract. It was about shaping the future of security technology in a way that served everyone equally, including those who had historically been misidentified, over-scrutinized, and wrongfully flagged by biased systems. A young lieutenant appeared at the door. "Mr. Thompson, they're ready for you now." Malcolm straightened his tie, squared his shoulders, and followed the officer into Conference Room Alpha. The room was larger than he'd expected, set up like a small auditorium, with rows of seats facing a podium and projection screen. Nearly every seat was filled uniformed military personnel, civilian officials, informal attire technical experts with security clearance badges. In the front row, Malcolm immediately recognized General Richardson, her 4 stars gleaming on her uniform, and beside her, Gerald Williams from Rivaltech, his expression carefully neutral. Colonel Reed introduced him with formal military efficiency, outlining NextGen's credentials and the purpose of the presentation. Malcolm approached the podium, connected his laptop to the projection system, and faced the assembled officials. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I'm here to present NextGen's security algorithm. But before I dive into technical specifications, I'd like to provide some context about why we developed this technology and the unique approach we've taken to eliminating bias in security systems." Malcolm clicked to his first slide. Not the company logo or a technical diagram as originally planned, but a split-screen image. On one side was a screenshot from the viral video showing Malcolm standing in the airplane aisle being questioned by flight attendants. On the other side was a graph showing false positive rates for current security algorithms when analyzing faces of different races. A murmur went through the audience. In the front row, Gerald Williams shifted uncomfortably. 2 days ago, I experienced something that millions of Americans experience regularly, being automatically presumed suspicious despite evidence to the contrary. Malcolm continued. A woman took my seat on an airplane, and when I politely requested it back, airline staff immediately treated me as the problem. It took third-party validation from another passenger before my own boarding pass was considered sufficient proof. Malcolm clicked to the next slide, transitioning seamlessly to the technical connection. This same pattern of bias is embedded in most security algorithms currently in use by both private and government systems. When a white face is analyzed, these systems operate with one set of assumptions. When a black or brown face is analyzed, the assumptions shift dramatically. He proceeded to walk through the specific technical innovations that allowed NextGen's algorithm to eliminate these disparities, the alternative data structures, the novel testing methodologies, the transparent decision paths that could be audited for fairness. As he spoke, Malcolm noticed General Richardson leaning forward slightly, her attention intensely focused. Other officials were taking notes, occasionally exchanging glances as connections formed between the personal anecdote he'd opened with and the technical solutions he was now presenting. The incident on that plane wasn't just an uncomfortable personal experience, Malcolm explained as he neared his conclusion. It was a perfect analog for what happens in automated systems millions of times per day. The difference is that most people don't have video evidence or influential allies to correct the mistake. They're simply flagged, detained, denied access, or worse, and they never know exactly why. He clicked to his final slide, which showed NextGen's performance metrics compared to industry standards, including rival tech's publicly available benchmarks. The differences were stark, particularly in equal false positive rates across demographic groups. NextGen's technology doesn't just perform better than competitors on traditional metrics, Malcolm concluded. It performs better specifically because it eliminates the biases that other systems perpetuate. This isn't just a moral imperative, though I believe it is one. It's a practical necessity for truly effective security in a diverse society. False positives waste resources. False negatives create vulnerabilities. Bias does both. As he finished speaking, the room remained silent for a moment. Then General Richardson spoke. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of military authority, "would you say that your personal experiences inform the development of this technology?" "Absolutely," General Malcolm replied without hesitation. "Just as your experiences inform your leadership style and decision-making process, none of us create technology in a vacuum. The question is whether we're conscious of how our experiences shape our innovations and whether we're willing to account for experiences different from our own." Richardson nodded, the ghost of a smile crossing her face. "Well said." What followed was 90 minutes of technical questioning, with Pentagon experts probing every aspect of NextGen's algorithm. Malcolm fielded each question with precise knowledge and transparent honesty, acknowledging limitations where they existed while highlighting the system's strengths. Throughout the extended Q&A, Gerald Williams sat silently in the front row, his expression growing increasingly tense as the Pentagon team's engagement with NextGen's technology deepened. The blackmail attempt had failed. The corporate espionage had backfired. The technical merits of Malcolm's algorithm were speaking for themselves. As the session concluded, Colonel Reed thanked Malcolm for his presentation. "We'll be in touch regarding our decision within the week," she informed him professionally. But as Malcolm gathered his materials, General Richardson approached him directly. "Mr. Thompson," she said quietly, ensuring their conversation remained private. "That was one of the most honest presentations I've seen in this building. Too often we discuss security as though it exists separate from human experience. Your approach was refreshing." "Thank you, General," Malcolm replied, recognizing the significance of her comment. "I witnessed something similar to your airline incident at Andrews Air Force Base last month," she continued. "Despite these," she tapped the 4 stars on her uniform, Some things transcend rank or achievement. With a slight nod, she moved away, leaving Malcolm with the distinct impression that he had just experienced a moment of recognition that went beyond professional evaluation. As he exited Conference Room Alpha, Malcolm caught sight of Gerald Williams being escorted to the podium for Rival Tech's presentation. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Williams looked away first. Whatever the outcome of the Pentagon's decision, Malcolm knew he had made the right choice. He had presented his technology, honestly acknowledging the human experiences that shaped it, rather than pretending to an impossible objectivity. He had connected the personal to the technical, the individual to the systemic. Stepping out of the Pentagon into the bright Washington sunlight, Malcolm noticed the protesters were still there, their signs visible in the distance. He thought of Jaden, of his grandmother, of all the people who would never have the opportunity to stand at a Pentagon podium and speak truth to power. His phone vibrated with a text from Tariq. How did it go? Malcolm considered the question as he walked toward his waiting taxi. The presentation had veered dramatically from their original plan. He had directly addressed race and bias in a setting where such topics were often carefully avoided. He had connected NextGen's technology to his personal experience in a way that made the stakes unmistakably clear. It went exactly as it needed to, he replied finally. 6 months after the fateful flight from Chicago to Atlanta and the Pentagon presentation that followed, Malcolm Thompson stood before a different audience in a different Washington venue. The ornate hearing room of the Senate Subcommittee on Technology and Privacy buzzed with activity as staffers, journalists, and spectators filled every available seat, with more gathered outside watching on monitors. Mr. Thompson, Senator Claudia Martinez began. Would you please explain to the committee how algorithmic bias in security systems impacts ordinary Americans? Malcolm leaned slightly toward the microphone. Certainly, Senator. When security algorithms contain bias, which most currently do, they create a technological form of discrimination that's often invisible to those not affected by it. A biased facial recognition system might consistently misidentify people with darker skin, flagging them for additional screening, or wrongfully linking them to criminal databases. An AI security system trained on biased historical data might flag a black customer entering a high-end store as suspicious while ignoring potentially concerning behaviors from white customers. And your company's technology addresses these issues. How exactly? Senator Richard Oakes interjected, his skepticism evident. By fundamentally reimagining how security AI is structured, Malcolm explained. Rather than training our systems on historically biased data and then trying to correct for that bias after the fact, which is the approach most companies take, we've built equity into the architecture from the ground up. Our algorithms are designed to recognize genuine security threats without relying on demographic shortcuts. The hearing continued for hours, with Malcolm providing detailed testimony about bias in security technology and NextGen's approach to eliminating it. The congressional inquiry had been prompted by a series of high-profile incidents involving biased security systems, including a major airport security breach that occurred when a traditional AI system focused disproportionately on screening minority passengers while missing an actual threat. This was Malcolm's third congressional testimony in recent months. Since winning the Pentagon contract, which NextGen had been awarded unanimously just days after his presentation, he had become the technology industry's most prominent voice on algorithmic fairness and security. As the hearing concluded, Malcolm checked his phone to find a message from Diana Turn on CNN. When you're done. They're covering the airline's announcement. Making his way through the Capitol corridors to his waiting car, Malcolm found a quiet corner to check the news on his phone. The CNN headline read, "Major airline announces new anti-bias training program following viral incident." The article detailed how the airline involved in Malcolm's incident was implementing comprehensive anti-bias training for all staff, using his experience as a case study. Heather and James, the flight attendants who had initially sided with Diane Bennett, were quoted anonymously, acknowledging how their unconscious biases had affected their judgment that day. When Malcolm's driver pulled up to the Pentagon 30 minutes later, the scene was dramatically different from his first visit 6 months earlier. This time, he wasn't an anxious contractor hoping to win a bid. He was here as a trusted partner, leading the implementation of next-gen security system throughout the Department of Defense's digital infrastructure. Colonel Reed greeted him at the security checkpoint. "Good testimony today, Mr. Thompson. Several of my colleagues were watching the live stream." "Thank you," Colonel Malcolm replied, following her through the familiar series of security procedures. "I'm looking forward to seeing the implementation progress. General Richardson is particularly eager to show you the initial results," Reed informed him as they walked toward the cybersecurity division. "The false positive reduction rates are exceeding even your projections." In the 6 months since winning the Pentagon contract, NextGen had grown exponentially. The company had tripled its workforce, opened offices in 3 additional cities, and its stock had climbed 400% since going public. More importantly, its approach to bias-free security was becoming the new industry standard, forcing competitors, including rival tech, to re-examine their own algorithms. Gerald Williams had resigned as rival tech CEO shortly after losing the Pentagon contract, the corporate espionage scandal having irreparably damaged his reputation. Diane Bennett had faced criminal charges for attempting to interfere with a government contract process, ultimately accepting a plea deal that included community service and a substantial fine. But for Malcolm, the most meaningful outcomes had nothing to do with stock prices or corporate rivalries. NextGen had established a foundation to support young people of color entering the tech field, with Jaden Williams, the boy from the airplane, serving as its first scholarship recipient. The company had also created an ethics board, specifically focused on identifying and eliminating bias in emerging technologies, with Tyler Jenkins among its founding members. As Malcolm entered the Pentagon Cybersecurity Operations Center, General Richardson extended her hand in greeting. "Mr. Thompson, perfect timing. We're about to run a comparative analysis between your system and the previous one. I think you'll find the results illuminating." The large display screen showed 2 security algorithms analyzing the same dataset, a stream of potential cybersecurity threats from around the world. Where the old system flagged certain international IP addresses at dramatically higher rates based solely on their country of origin, NextGen's technology focused on actual behavioral patterns, resulting in both fewer false positives and more accurate identification of genuine threats. "Your algorithm isn't just more equitable," General Richardson observed. "It's demonstrably more effective." "That's always been our argument," Malcolm replied. "Bias doesn't just hurt those it targets. It creates blind spots and inefficiencies that make everyone less secure." As they discussed the implementation details, Malcolm reflected on how the humiliating incident on Flight 2187 had become a catalyst for transformation, not just for his company, but for an entire approach to technology and security. Later that afternoon, Malcolm boarded another flight, this one from Reagan National back to Chicago. As he settled into his first-class seat, he noticed the flight attendant, a young black woman named Tasha, checking his boarding pass with a genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Thompson," she said, returning his pass without the scrutiny he'd grown accustomed to over years of air travel. "Can I get you anything before we take off?" "Just water, thank you," he replied, struck by the simple dignity of a normal, respectful interaction. As other passengers boarded, Malcolm noticed a young black girl, perhaps 13 or 14, sitting across the aisle in first class. She had a laptop, open lines of code visible on the screen. When she glanced up and saw him, her eyes widened in recognition. She gave him a subtle nod of acknowledgement, one tech innovator to another, one barrier breaker to another. Malcolm nodded back, seeing in her the future he'd been fighting for, a world where her presence in first class wouldn't be questioned, where her ideas would be evaluated on merit rather than marred by bias, where technology would enhance rather than diminish her humanity. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 3549 to Chicago. We've got clear skies ahead and should arrive right on schedule." As the plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the air, Malcolm Thompson gazed out at the Washington monuments receding below, thinking about how far they'd all come in 6 months and how far they still had to go. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination like Malcolm experienced? Would you speak up like Tyler or stay silent? Has this story changed how you think about bias in technology and everyday life? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you found Malcolm's journey inspiring. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most important changes begin with a single person refusing to give up their seat. Malcolm Thompson's journey reveals profound truths about racism in America. The incident showcased how racial bias operates even in privileged spaces where credentials, success, and proof aren't enough to overcome immediate assumptions. Yet the story also demonstrates the power of allies who speak up rather than remain silent witnesses. Tyler's intervention changed the outcome, not because his testimony was more valid, but because the system gave his white voice greater credibility. A painful reality Malcolm navigated daily. The transformation from humiliating incident to catalyst for change highlights how personal experiences shape technological innovation. Malcolm's algorithm eliminated bias, precisely because he understood its real-world impact firsthand. His decision to incorporate his experience into his Pentagon presentation rather than compartmentalizing it proved that our greatest professional contributions often come from embracing our full humanity, not hiding it. Most importantly, this story teaches us that fighting discrimination isn't just morally right, it's practically necessary. Bias systems don't just hurt those they target. They create inefficiencies and vulnerabilities that make everyone less secure. The greatest innovations often come from those who experience the flaws in existing systems and possess both the vision and courage to create something better. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wondered whether to speak up? What would you have done if you were on Malcolm's flight? Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or experiences with racism or bias in everyday situations. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that expose the reality of racism in America. Share this video with someone who might benefit from seeing how discrimination operates in subtle ways and how we can all be part of creating meaningful change. Thank you for watching and being part of this important conversation. Remember that progress happens when good people refuse to accept injustice as normal, whether on airplanes or in algorithms.